Good morning, and thank you all for joining us today. The session will run over the next 1.5 hours, including Q&A. The session is being recorded and will be uploaded to Microsoft Startup and Reactor YouTube channels. I will share the link to our YouTube channel in the chat section soon. Before we begin, please take a moment to read our code of conduct. We are all here to learn together, so please be respectful of other people's views, understanding of differences, being kind and considerate in the way you engage. The chat will be open throughout, and we do encourage you all to participate. Also, please keep your mics muted during the session. I would now like to welcome Vinayak, our speaker for today's session. Vinayak currently works as CTO in residence at Microsoft for Startup, helping startup to scale their tech stacks, teams, and products. With over 20 years of experience, Vinayak has built multiple products across different domains such as IoT, large-scale network, and large-scale data system in variety of individual contributor and senior technical leadership roles. But for now, I will hand over to Vinayak to begin the session. Over to you, Vinayak.
Thanks, Rashmita. Should I start sharing the presentation?
Yes, you can. I just stopped.
Just give me a second. Uh, can you see my screen? All right. Let me just put it in
Yes.
presentation mode. Can you see the full screen presentation?
Yes, Vinayak.
I think I forgot to share it with sound. Try sharing it with sound. That's because I have a couple of videos. Just wanted to make sure I'm sharing it in the right mode. Cool. Hi everyone. My name is Vinayak Hegde. I am the CTO-in-residence at Microsoft for Startups. And this is a little information about me. So I have about 2 decades of experience in various roles, and I worked across multiple sectors: networking, developer tools, ad tech, marketing tech, e-commerce, CRM, media, and smart mobility. And I've been the CTO at Zoomcar, which is a smart mobility company based out of India and funded by Sequoia. And currently, I'm working as CTO in Distance and Microsoft for Startups. In this role, I do actually help startups with any kind of tech-related help. So it could be like specific to technology, for example, how do you choose a good stack? What are the different components, and what are the pros and cons? How do they scale the architecture? On the processes side, I help them with figuring out a good deployment strategy, DevSecOps, incident management, and so on. And on the people side, I help them with having the right team structure, having building technical ladders for people, hiring. So basically, I help them with the entire range of I would say experience that a CTO does, and actually work very closely with CTOs for uh, you know um, for developing their tech and business strategy. So that's about me. So let's start quickly jumping into the presentation. So what I will be doing in the presentation is I'll be giving an overview of the Azure platform. So I'll go over the different pieces that are there, because Azure as a platform is very wide and there are lots of different things that are there. So what it is not possible to cover every service individually, but what I'll try to do is in each of the buckets that I have, I will actually try to go deeper into one or two services that are of relevance to startups. Some of the services might make sense when when you are a little bigger, and some of them might make sense when you are in a 0 to 1 phase or a pre product market fit. Yeah. So I just before I go into the services, I wanted to talk about the deployment model of the cloud. Probably you've seen and heard this before, but for those who haven't, I just want to quickly go over it. Um, so we started always, before the cloud, there was on-prem, and we had the different layers: networking, storage, servers, virtualization, OS, any kind of middleware that you run, runtime. If, for example, the JVM, data and application, every everything was managed by the organization, right? When the cloud came in, the first avatar of the cloud was in the form of infrastructure as service, right? You could basically rent VMs or use VMs from the cloud. And then what is known, this is known as shared responsibility model. The networking, storage, servers, and virtualization, this part was being managed by the vendor. And sorry, whereas anything you install on the bare hardware or virtualized hardware, which is like the OS, middleware, runtime, applications, and data, was taken care by the company that use the cloud, right? By the organization that use the client. And as it evolved, more and more parts of stack started getting taken over in some sense by the vendor. So it becomes easier and easier to manage for the client, right? So what you see in platform as a service, which is also popular and which we'll kind of dig deeper into the presentation, not only like the bottom four layers, but also the OS, middleware, and runtime was taken care uh, by the vendor, and only you had to manage your applications and data. So this is probably known as PaaS or platform as a service. And finally, you have SaaS, in which the entire stack is actually taken care by the vendor, and you basically just log in and start using the website. The application development is done by the vendor. The data is managed by the vendor. Obviously, you have access to your data, and you can do customization to the application. But essentially, the entire service, entire software is not installed, but it runs in the cloud, and you basically just log in to that, or you can access it, via own browser, typically as a client, right? So everything gets managed by the vendor. So this is like what is known as shared responsibility model. And as we can kind of go into the presentation, we'll be talking about each of these as well. Cool. So let me move on to what is Azure, right? So those of you who have some experience with Azure, you can typically divide it into four different parts. First is like the edge devices, which is the Azure Stack, Azure Data Box, the hardware that we have in Azure Sphere, Kinect, which is our AR/VR component, and HoloLens, which is also similar. And then you have, serverless, right? You have like the web, mobile, mixed reality, containers, events plus integration, for any kind of IoT related stuff or any kind of, third party data feed or internal data feed that you have. Then obviously there's databases to store your data and query your data. There's analytics to do advanced analysis of, how your customers are experiencing the product. And then there's AI, machine learning, IoT media. And then we talked about the infrastructure as a service. So your compute, networking, storage, security, and identity, right? So all of these are provided as infrastructure as a service. And finally, to make all of this work, you need different tools to write code, to deploy, and to make apps. So you have obviously have Visual Studio, you have GitHub, and Visual Studio Code also is a very popular tool, which is open source actually, that gets used, and Power Apps and Power BI as well. Right. So just to get a glimpse of the customers that we have, more than obviously we have different kind of startup program, but also this technology is trusted by more than 95% of the Fortune 500 companies that you have. So we have a very high bar for quality and operational capability that you have. So you have airlines from such as Lufthansa to car manufacturers such as Ford, and a whole bunch of other companies such as Xerox, HarperCollins, GE, Walmart, 3M actually uses. So when I talk about Microsoft Azure, obviously I'm going to talk about the product, but I want to focus on four different parts, which is how to make yourself productive, how to work in a hybrid working environment, especially those of you who work in a regulated environment, such as running a fintech company, insurtech company, or a healthcare company. You tend to have clients who are very conscious of their data, and they want to be able to actually own the data or run some of the due to either data residency or due to regulations, or to have control over their own infra, probably right need to run them hybrid mode. So I'll talk about that. I'll talk about how we are connected with the open community, open source community, and how we have opened up some of the parts of our stack and how you can use them. And finally, I'm going to focus on trust, which is like the security, identity part, where we provide a trusted platform for you to achieve your goals. So let's dive into the productive part, right? So when we look at applications, there are three different parts. There's obviously infrastructure, which is what your application runs on. Data, which is what your application works with and stores. So this is in some sense the lifeblood of your organization, and this is often core to what you do. And then there's the code itself, right? Which is typically your IP and what your application does. So you can migrate or innovate. So you can migrate from other clouds, or you have multi-cloud deployment, or you have on-prem and Azure cloud. So you can have mixed deployments, and Azure actually supports it, supports management of containers also on Azure cloud, other clouds using Arc. So basically, you get like a unified management. You get better security. We have governance and compliance tool, especially in highly regulated industries. This is super important. And we talked about the tools and DevOps, right? So here we have, we are going to talk maybe a little bit about Azure DevOps, but if you are in the Microsoft for Starters program, you also get access to the GitHub credits, right? So we do a separate series on GitHub, which also you can look at and then kind of make best use of that. And that will help you kind of be productive. So you set up the infra, you set up your databases, your data infrastructure, for processing, and finally you deploy code. And you want to be able to do this in a in a consistent manner. And Azure can help you there, right? So before I go into the different products, I just wanted to highlight this part because lots of people who use the cloud may not be aware of the different ways in which you can use Azure, right? So So obviously, I think everybody's aware of now infrastructure service, and I don't need to explain that. So you can actually use Azure Compute, Azure Database, Azure Storage, each of which we will go deeper into this topic. And you can use your do it yourself software on run on top of it, right? So you can use it as infrastructure service, and that is one way. The other way you can use it is that we have something called as the Azure Marketplace. So in the Azure Marketplace, you can get access to different kinds of products, third party, first party, and third party products that you can run on your infra. For example, you can get support from MongoDB for running a Mongo monitor, and you can manage your Hadoop instances using HD Insight. Or Elastic also has support, plus different kind of plugins that you can run and deploy from Elasticsearch, right? So if you have any search kind of applications, or if you have like document DB, there's MongoDB, but there's also Cosmos DB, which I'll go into a little deeper. And there's like HD Insight, which is like the Hadoop big data part of it for running large workloads when it comes to data. And finally, I talked about PaaS, right? So maybe you're on Azure cloud, or maybe you're on other clouds sometimes, or you're in a combination of a multi-cloud scenario, or you're in a combination of hybrid, which is on-prem and prem. And then in those cases also, it is just possible to use like platform as a service. For example, you can run Azure Cognitive Services, which provide AI services and large-scale data models, very easy access to them. You can run Azure Synapse Analytics, where you have a mix of different kinds of data sources, and then you use that to query. And then you have Azure IoT, right, which is our IoT platform, so that you can connect devices and have, say, intelligent factories, for example. So these are the three different modes in which you can use Azure. So you don't need to use one mode. You can use a combination of modes depending on what set of applications you have. But Azure, I wanted to bring this up because Azure uses the flexibility to build applications and your infra in the way that you want, right? So you can choose one of these or a combination of these. So with that, let's dive into the. So are there any questions till now, or Rashmita, should we take questions at the end?
Yeah, we can take questions at the end, and if there are questions, folks, please, put all the questions in the chat. So probably Vinay can take all these questions in the middle and or at the end.
Great. So I don't see any questions right now. So what I will do is I'll move on, and then as we go on, I think uh, we can take any questions that we have. Yeah. So when you look at compute, the base layer compute that we have, there are virtual machines which provide Windows and Linux virtual machines in seconds, and you can start and stop them. You have virtual machine scale sets, right? So if you want to be able to scale up and scale down, for example, let's say you are running you are e-commerce company and you are running a sale, and then as the time to the scale comes closer, you need to maybe scale up, right? And as the traffic goes away, you need to scale down. So virtual machine scale sets actually help you scale up and scale down to thousands of machines, using VMs as the base layer. Then you have like containers, and I'll talk about containers separately. But if you want to use containers and AKS, you can build and scale containers with managed Kubernetes, and you have a good access to having the underlying VMs and then running containers on that. So you can use virtual machine scale sets, or if you're using containers, you can use AKS. So you have, again, as I said, one of the things with Azure is choice. So you can use either of them. Or you have the app service where you can quickly create powerful cloud apps for web and mobile. If you really like having to manage less and less code, I think one end of the extreme, obviously one end is like the on-prem service where you manage everything, and the other end of the spectrum is you have Azure Functions, right? So what you do in Azure Functions, you can choose a language like Python, JavaScript, Java, .NET, and what you can do is you can write functions, and then you can tie those functions in various ways. We also have a very interesting feature called durable functions, where you can actually, when between function invocations that are typically stateless, you can actually store state, right? So you can do very complex workflows, fan out, chaining, something requiring human input. So you can do all of these using Azure Functions. um, Many cases, you might also require an Azure dedicated physical server, right? In certain scenarios, especially could be related to government or regulated sector. So you have an Azure dedicated host as well. And then there are, you can run SQL Server on machines, and you have also Spot instances, right? Which is like a marketplace which has unused compute capacity at deep discount. So anything that is interruptible, like for example, you need to do an ETL job, or you need to have excess capacity at very short notice, and you are okay that certain maybe workloads are interrupted. You can use Azure Spot instances. The difference between normal virtual machines and Azure Spot instances is that once you have run a virtual machine, it will be up until which is called on demand. It will be up until you kind of shut it down or destroy it. But in the case spot instances, they can go away anytime, right? So your architecture needs to support that. So now you have talked about compute. Let's talk about a little bit about storage. So you have Azure Disk Storage, which provides highly durable block storage. You have data lake storage, which is ADLS, for having building a data lake and large set of files. You have blob storage, which you can use it to maybe store assets, yeah, something like images, or you can use it to store blobs of data. You can use it to store media. You can basically use it to store anything that you want addressable by a small namespace, and it provides like object storage very easily. Yes, and I think one of the best practices is like to do backup. So especially to simplify data protection for DR, or for a whole bunch of resiliency reasons, will need backup. So you can back up your entire base infra using Azure Backup. And finally, I think there is archival and support for NetApp as well, right? If you are using NetApp filers, typically startups won't use, but if there is a need for that, it is available for that. And finally, the data box, which is like if you have cases where you want to go to the edge. For example, you are running like a surveillance app, and you need to be present, let's say in a prison, and you want to be able to store and run analytics on that. So the data box can actually run at the edge, right? So you have those kind of semi-connected or disconnected scenarios also in which you can have storage. I think today most of the people, they do not run VMs, they run containers, because containers are easier to manage, and the tooling around it is much better. So, for example, you need if you want to if you have an app or if you have a microservice, you can actually build an image and store it in the container registry, right? Once you've stored it into the container registry, then you can actually use either container instances where you run one-off instances, For example, as I said, ETL jobs or notifications, or anything else that that probably typically I would run something similar to a cron job in an earlier world. You can run, and also I talked about AKS, so you can run it using AKS as well. And as I said, like the other end of the spectrum was Azure functions, right? So these are the things that we have in containers. I think one of the newer ones is like Azure Container Apps. So you can actually build and deploy modern apps and use microservices to build serverless containers, and you can deploy them. You also have support for something similar to Red Hat OpenShift. So if you prefer Red Hat OpenShift, there is an option to run containers not on like AKS but on Azure Redshift, and this can be dictated also by what the clients want. So as I said, like as I keep talking about these different tools, you will see that um, you'll see that there is a lot of flexibility in how we want to run the application, because we support a wide variety of deployment modes. So we covered the base part. I think one of the important parts is once you have network and storage, once you have storage and compute, is also you want to be able to move data between machines, talk to the external world, talk to other applications. So if you want to build a virtual network, or if you want to do load balancing, because especially as you grow, I think one or couple of servers may not be enough to service your client. So you might have to have load balancing across different machines. You might need a VPN gateway. You might need to run a content delivery network, so that the end user delivery, especially like say in a key commerce setup or anything that has a content play, you will need a content delivery network, so that your videos and your images and other assets load very fast. Or you might need to use Azure DNS to actually be able to round robin, or be able to resolve your different websites. This could also be useful, for example, especially in a SaaS scenario, where you actually have subdomains for every particular user, and then what you have is in the setup you can actually automate creating of subdomains with Azure DNS. So there are all of these options that are available. There is also express route. For example, if you have a data residency requirement, let's say in one of the countries like say Saudi Arabia, Singapore, or India, or any of them, you can actually connect to the customer's data center using Azure Express route. And what it does is it provides dedicated private fiber networks to Azure. So the any kind of chattiness or any kind of a network traffic, you have somewhat of an assured latency that is possible. And if you have any kind of a business model that needs like maps, or that needs ground station information, you can use Azure Orbital to take that data and process that data, and integrate it with your workflow, right? So there are lots of options, everything from virtual private networks to load balancing to DNS to content delivery, and even like hybrid scenarios for something like Azure Express route can be really useful. So again, like we talked about all of these, but I want to kind of make it tangible, right? Like how do you combine these different use cases? And what is like a typical flow, let's say for an e-commerce setup, possibly, right? So I want to give an example of that. Like, so you can see that on one side you have the different data sources, and those data sources generate data that go into data storage, and you might have a real-time layer. For example, your recommendations might be real time, or any kind of notifications might be real time. If the user is exiting the site, then you might want to give some kind of a notification. And you can have both stream processing and batch processing. Both of them can be informed by different kinds of machine learning models that you have. So machine learning can be also done in what is typically known as a Lambda architecture, where on one stream you do the normal analytics, which is your ETL workload, and another stream you take the same data and then you do stream processing. So this is possible, and both of them might have some kind of windowing algorithms. They might have some kind of notification or anomaly detection use cases. And finally, for long term storage and analytics, you can have analytics data store. I talked about ADLS as well. And then finally, once all of this analytics is done, you need a visual interface to be able to see it and make sense of it and draw insights from it, and that is where the analytics and reporting comes, right? So this is like a block diagram. I'm not going to explode this block diagram and show you what are the different components that can be seen from a data services point of view, right? So let's say you have a mobile app, you can get data via mobile app, you can get data via IoT sensors, you have your OLT systems, your point of sale systems, your website. So all of these are data sources. In terms of real time, you can data through Azure Event Hub, or you can even use something like Kafka if you want, if you prefer open source and you have expertise with Kafka. You have Azure IoT that does a real time stream. If you go to the data storage, you can have the Azure Data Lake storage, or it is even possible to use an object storage, something like Azure Blob Storage as well. I talked about Hive, which is like provides an SQL-like interface on top of Hadoop, or you can use Azure Data Lake Analytics, which is our solution, or you can use Azure AT Insight. So again, you will see that there are different layers. Either you can use DUT yourself and run that, or you can get support and vetted images from the marketplace, or you can use first-party solutions like Azure Data. So the choice, there is a lot of choice in what you can use. Similarly, once when it comes to your own running AI, you can use Azure Machine Learning, where you can build and run your own models, and we have support for the entire MLOps cycle of that. Or you can use Azure Databricks, or you can use like cognitive services. I'll be talking a little bit more about that as we go on in the presentation. And then eventually, all of this data is processed by various means. Then you can visualize this using Microsoft Power BI or different kind of Azure analysis services, right? So we talked about storage, right? But storage by itself is maybe not useful. You want structured storage and be ability to query data. And here we have a plethora of options. You have Azure SQL, which has Azure SQL Server. We have support for Cosmos DB, which provides a fast NoSQL databases, which is geographically distributed, and you can run indexes. And if you have a document store, um, you can use Cosmos DB. Now, the best part of Cosmos DB, which I have not put in this presentation, but I'll talk a little bit, is that if you're using Cassandra or if you're using MongoDB, you can, and if you need a geographic replication and you need better management and need faster object retrieval, there is an option where you have you basically it talks the MongoDB via protocol, it talks the Cassandra via protocol. So you have to make no changes in your application, but can still use Azure Cosmos DB, and that is something very very powerful, right? As you grow. Obviously, we have support for MySQL and Postgres as well, which are the which a lot of startups do prefer, and we have support for that. And there's one more service which isn't there, but which I'll talk about is what is known as Azure Hyperscale. So if you're building like a data warehouse or a OLAP data store, you can use Azure Hyperscale, which is based on Postgres, extension called CitusDB. Again, it is open source, so you can run your own instance of that, or if you prefer a managed service PaaS, then we have like Azure Hyperscale, where you can basically horizontally scale your database, and then it distributes the data automatically without any kind of changes on the application, right? So it is really beautiful as you scale and you're in that growth stage. Yeah, and in addition to that, we have support for caching in Apache Redis, sorry, in Azure Cache for Redis, and also support for Apache Cassandra, also in a managed instance scenario. Uh, uh, Talking about Azure Analytics, I have already talked about much of these. I talked about Stream Analytics. I've talked about Azure Data Lake Storage, HD Insights as well. So I'll leave those out. I want to focus on a few ones. Azure Purview. So Azure Purview is a unified data governance solution. Basically, if you want to add fine-grained access to your data, especially as you grow large, you want to be able to annotate data and be able to track data lineage and be able to give access to maybe certain kinds of sensitive data only to a few people. So we will need a unified data governance solution as you grow, and Azure Purview actually fills that need, right? Um, Another hidden gem in analytics is Azure Data Explorer, right? So I talked about my own experience as a startup CTO, and one of the challenges I had when I was a startup CTO is being able to actually query data in a consistent manner, and actually being able to meld different kinds of data. Some amount of data was there in like databases, some amount of data was there in unstructured storage, some amount of data was there in different kind of files, right? So what Azure Data Explorer does is it allows you to take different kinds of data and then be able to it allows you to be able to query that data in a very seamless fashion, right? So any kind of exploratory analysis that you want to do, Azure data is really useful. For example, let's say you are a SaaS company and you're providing some kind of service to different tiers of users across geographies, and you want to know, you have a free tier, premium tier, and let's say an enterprise tier, right? You want to know what is the experience. Hello, is there any question? Yeah, can you just mute yourself if you're not asking any questions? Yeah, so going on, so if you want to kind of like, let's say, take observability data and then combine it with like metadata, business metadata that talks about the tier of the person that is using your service, you can actually easily do that. And this is something that was really really hard to do, and you have to build custom tools and ETLs and workflows. But Azure Data Explorer uses this language called, very similar to SQL, called KQL, or kuch to query language, that makes it really easy. We talked about the AI services, and we'll talk a little bit about cognitive services in detail, so I won't talk about that. But I'll talk about some of the other services that we have, like Azure Open AI service. So especially if you're on a Microsoft or startup credits, you get access to OpenAI service. So you can use language generative model like GPT-3, or you can use generate images using text prompts like you would do for using DALI. You also have access to the codex service for using it to generate code. There are different kinds of models that are available under Azure OpenAI. And cognitive services allows you to build an enterprise scale search for app development, right? So any kind of search, you can again use the open source Elasticsearch. But if you want like higher capability, be able to do information retrieval at a using AI, then I think cognitive services actually does different kinds of methodologies, incorporates different kind of methodologies from AI models that actually make the search better. For example, if you have misspellings, or to show related content, to be able to detect what kind of content you want, whether it's address, whether it's image, it can do that fairly easily. Form recognizer allows you to take external workflows. For example, any kind of forms that you have, let's say passports or driver licenses, or any kind of mundane forms like hospital forms, or any kind of offline processes that require papers. You can basically take that. You can do using the once you take the image of the physical form or document, you can take that and extract data. And what it does is, you can not just extract data, but you can layer a data model on top. So what it does, it allows you to return that information as JSON. And once you take the image in, you get a JSON, you get a reply in the form of JSON, which can then be, you can actually either store it or process it further. For example, you can extract the name from the passport, you can extract the name, the photo, and a whole bunch of other things very, very easily using something like this. So this works very well with any kind of workflow system, any kind of identity system that you have, especially for offline processes. Cool. Any questions before I go into the AI part? Oh, I see that Vivek has been answering some of the questions. But what we'll do is I'll continue, and then we can maybe take questions at the end, right? So I want to talk about Azure Cognitive Services because it has a bunch of different things. So you have decision, you have vision, you have language, speech, and web search. So we talked a little bit about web search. So if you want to do Bing entity search, or Bing web search, or you want to search news, or you want to build a custom search for maybe like a specific vertical, for example, legal search, or I've seen this getting used in real estate, where you search different kinds of contract, you can use that. Then you have in the decision services, you have the anomaly detector, you can do a personalizer. In speech, you can do text to speech, speech to text. You can do speaker identification. You can do a neural voice, where you can basically have what is known as a voice font, and you can train a model. So every time, for example, somebody either calls you over the phone or through a bot, you interact with the bot using speech. It is possible to use in-app or through the web interface custom voice that you can build, right? So it's extremely powerful, and it has support for lots of different languages, not just English as well. In Vision, obviously, you can have ink recognizer, which is basically handwriting recognizer. You can index videos. For example, one of the startups that I've worked with use this to actually figure out, what is happening in the scene, who are the actors, um, and basically it extract information from the video and basically it makes like a storyboard, which can make it easy for editing. I talked about form recognizer, which basically can take paper forms and extract data out of them, or you can have PDFs also through which it can do. Um, then we have custom vision. Like for example, let's say you are building solutions for the retail industry, and when you're building solutions for retail industry and you're doing what is known as typically like in a store like shelf analysis, and you want to know what is placed where on the shelf, and you can use that to know that, hey, the number of, say, Coca-Cola cans is actually reducing, and you can hook it up with the supply chain, and you can order it as the stock is getting depleted, right? So you can use custom vision, and what is best about this custom vision is you have pre-trained models, but in spite of having those pre-trained models, for example, let's say in a retail scenario, it can recognize a can, but what you can do is layer on it. You can tell it, hey, this is not just a soda can, but it is like a Sprite can, or it is a Pepsi can, or it's a Coca-Cola can, right? So you can actually layer your own kind of training on top of what is already there. So all of these services are actually uh, are actually extendable. Another one is what is known as LUIS, or language understanding, where basically given a body of text, it understands what is the context, and then that can be used to generate, for example, from conversations, you can build like Q&A. Using manuals, you can build like question and answers. So it allows you to transform existing data that you have from customer service, or other kinds of conversations, such as or other kind of documentation, such as manuals, and be able to kind of extract text and make sense of it. And then it can be used to generate bots. And then based on the natural language understanding, you can answer the same question asked in different ways using bot, which is Lewis and Q&A maker also. So it makes it easy to uh, generate bots as well, chat bots as well. Again, staying on machine learning, you have different kinds of models that you can have. You have domain-specific pre-trained models, and I've talked about that: vision, speech, language, web search, and decision. But let's say if you want to build your own and you want to explore your own models in addition to this, because maybe you have domain expertise in this specific area, or you know a lot about the use case, and this maybe pre-trained models may not do. So it is possible to actually integrate your own models, experiment with that, either using Visual Studio Code, Azure Notebooks, Jupyter, and the command line, right? And then we have support for most of the popular frameworks. There's PyTorch, TensorFlow, Scikit-learn, and interestingly, there is something called as ONNX. So if you have not explored ONNX, I would suggest going to onnx.ai website and looking at ONNX model. What it does is it allows you to have a interchange format and a runtime where you can run the same model. You can train a model in, like, say, TensorFlow, and you can take that model and then be able to run it like, say, PyTorch on a completely different device, right? So again, there are certain limitations around that, but what it does, it allows you, it kind of removes the dependency on the framework or the device, right? So what Java did in some case, again, like, it's not a fair comparison, but essentially it is like what Java did for different kinds of devices. ONNX does similar things for popular frameworks in the AI world. And again, as I said, you have you have machine learning VMs. You have Azure Databricks, or you have Azure ML, or Azure Machine Learning to be able to run it. And finally, at the base layer, right, you need to be able to have compute. So you support obviously for CPUs, but also GPUs. And if there is a specific requirement for FPGAs, we have you can get access to FPGAs to run your service fast. So at every layer of the model, depending on what you want to build, how you want to build, what is the deployment model, what is the regulatory framework, what is your team comfortable with, you can make any of those choices, and Azure supports pretty much all of them. So, enough of me talking. I want to kind of, showcase a customer scenario here, in the domain of football. And this is one of our customers who has used whatever I talked till now, in different ways, and they will talk about the use case. So let me just run this video.
La Liga is the brand that people love. We are very lucky to have fans, not customers. If we sum the followers in social media for clubs, players, and La Liga, we reach 1.6 billion. Our goals are to be the first choice of entertainment for the fans worldwide. We decided to partner Microsoft for technology, developing a huge digital ecosystem comprised by mobile apps, mobile games, websites, and digital assistant based on bots and artificial intelligence. Microsoft plays a key role. We are working with them as a data platform that help us gather all the information that we get from the fans in a unique place. We use Microsoft Bot Framework to do that. We use also Azure Bot Service to host the bot, and we use Azure Cognitive Services to understand what the fans want, especially the speech and language understanding. We want to have one global product that will cover different fans from different parts of the world. Being able to trigger what the fans want in the right moment is the most important thing. We have been able to increase our social media followers by almost 30%. Technology is helping us to drive the brand near to the fans. This is key for our success and our growth. Microsoft has provided us the tools to improve our products and services for our fans.
Cool. So I hope this was useful. So I just wanted to talk about a tangible use case and not talk about all of this in the abstract. Um, so now, like, we talked about all of the things that you need to build. And once you have built all of the, all of your technology, the application, the next step is actually running it in production and be so once, if you look at one of the challenges which especially early stage and even like growth stage startups have is that how do they increase the velocity of deployment in terms of building features, right? And there are different ways in which we can help you, right? There is Azure DevOps that provides services for team to share code, track work, and ship software. There's Azure Pipelines that allows you to continuously build, test, and deploy to any platform and cloud. And if you want to use any kind of tracking, there is Azure boards as well. There's Azure repos, which gives unlimited cloud-hosted private Git repos for your project. And in addition to what we have in terms of Azure, and especially for Microsoft for startups, um, um, companies, we have also have access to GitHub. So get similar kind of functionality in GitHub as well. And two more things I want to talk about. One is the load testing. So once you actually push something out, you want to know what is the limits of your code or your application, and also you want to know what are the limits of the infra, right? Obviously there are theoretical limits, but when you actually run it in production, you know what are the bottlenecks. And for that, I think the Azure load testing service can be like really, really useful to perform high scale load testing. Cool. Yeah, and yes, there is also if you store artifacts, especially with compiled languages, for example, like with Java, you can actually create host and share packages with your teams as well. Uh, let's say you're building, in addition to all of this, you are building, say, a connected factory or any kind of, hardware device, maybe either in the healthcare industry or, in the retail industry or, any other specific vertical. So you have the option of actually using certified hardware. That is one option. The other option is you can use your own hardware. So obviously, you can use something like Azure RTOS to run on it, but you can also run maybe Linux or some other OS that is there. As long as it can interface with like Azure IoT Hub, you can use it to collect, manage, monitor billions of assets. And to do this, I think you can build like I would say, let's say with the connected factory use case, say if you want, you can build like a virtual uh, or a digital equivalent of that using Azure Digital Twin, right? So what Azure Digital Twin does is very unique. So in the in the real world, your physical sensor, right? You might need to set certain thresholds for alerting or for some kind of operating capability. For example, let's say you have a hydroponic farm, right? And this is a real use case which I have seen. And you want to be able to test the condition of the soil or condition of the water, in especially hydroponic system. And you want to know what is the temperature, what is the humidity of the surrounding environment. So if you want to sense all of this, what you will have is you'll have those physical sensors in the connected farm or the connected factory, and then you will have a digital twin, which is a digital equivalent of that. So any parameter that you change in the digital twin can be reflected pretty much in real time in the device, right? So basically, you can manage all of your large scale deployments, which can be multi-country, multi-factory, multi-site. Um, and using multiple sensors, different kinds of sensors using Azure digital twins, right? So this is something that has been like very hard to do traditionally without building your own software. But I think Azure digital twins actually does that. So you have obviously have Azure Defender to monitor and detect. Basically, have think of it as like the antivirus for your IoT devices to detect security threats. You can use Azure Sphere, which is I talked about is our own hardware that you can use secure connected devices which are vetted by the Azure team. Um, um, you can use maps, as I said, along with digital twins to figure out, what is the physical layout of, of the connected farm or the connected industry that is, which are typical use cases of these. And then you can use the Azure IoT Edge also to be able to extend any kind of decision making or any kind of processing as close to the edge as possible, because that might be needed in certain kind of disconnected or semi-connected or sporadically connected use cases as well, right? Uh, so so there are all again like there is again flexibility in using own hardware, collecting data, being able to take this data, and as I said in the earlier use case, you can take all of this data and then you can have real-time alerting on that. You can run stream analytics on that. You can run you can store this data in a database and run analytics on that. So all of this becomes really easy using Azure IoT. And finally, there are other kinds of services that can be extended. For example, in media, especially if you are building, like say, over-the-top platform or OTT platform, or you're running an edutech platform, right? So you should be able to do live and on-demand streaming for maybe live classes or live events. So you'll need encoding services, you'll need transporting services, you will need content delivery network to kind of stream from there. You'll need some kind of media analytics to see, what kind of what are the quality of streams that people are playing, what devices are they playing on, what are they watching, what are the times of day they are watching. So all of these can be done using media analytics. Um, you can do also talk about video indexers. So if you want to know what is the content of the stream that is going out, that can be done. So any kind of adaptive streaming or live streaming or on demand streaming can be done fairly easily using that. If you have any kind of, if you need any kind of identity solution, either B2C or even internal, Azure Active Directory can do it. And um, not only does it provide an identity solution, but is also very secure. So you have like information protection, you have for multi-factor authentication to be able to secure your own domain, right? And again, like you can have different kind of policies to allow maybe access to certain assets, or enforce certain kind of authentication. So you can basically take your any kind of policies that you have either from a client side or your own internal policies and be able to implement that. And there are various kinds of SDKs, whether it is like Kinect or whether it is like any kind of code SDKs that we have. There's Visual Studio, there's Visual Studio Code, Azure DevOps, which I already talked about. And there are various kind of developer tool integrations that can be built. Similarly, on the mixed reality front, we have Azure Spatial Anchors. We have Azure Digital Twins, which can be kind of represented in the mixed reality scenario also. That can be done really well. So what I'm going to do is also now, before I go further, again play a customer scenario, which is like ASOS, which is like a just in time, or rather, I would say not just in time, maybe like fast fashion provider, which is also available online. It's actually popular, a lot popular in the Western world, and how they're using these different services and combining different services, including like Cosmos DB, which I talked about. So you have a real world tangible use case of how these services actually merge together, and you can get like some kind of a reference of how these services are implemented in the real world and not just in the abstract sense.
ASOS wants to be the #1 fashion destination for 20 somethings around the world. We have just over 12 million active customers, over 800 brands, and we're introducing about 4 to 5,000 new products onto the site every single week. We don't have shops. People know about ASOS from the internet. We have 1 minute where that digital platform is out. We're not serving our customers.
When you have 85,000 products in your product range, it's vital to have a personalized consumer experience. We took a couple of big decisions early. The first was to go a microservice, the second was to go Azure Platform as a Service. We're looking to take advantage of Azure next generation compute, introducing service fabric based services, and already seeing increases in developer velocity, service density, flexibility. Cosmos DB is used as the model store, the gateway from the offline to the online data science worlds. It allows us to distribute the data models to be near the services wherever in the world they're deployed. We like the immediate elasticity, so we can store data models of any size. We like the very low latency for random reads. We like Cosmos DB because we wanted our software designers and software engineers focused on creating competitive advantage rather than looking after server infrastructure.
Our first Black Friday on the full new platform in Azure, we had 167 million visits. We had literally no problems throughout the entire weekend.
Azure has delivered as a rock solid platform to create an ever more compelling consumer experience.
So this was a good um, example of a customer combining different services like cognitive services, Cosmos DB, deployment philosophy, and developer tools in a very integrated way, right? Um, so we talked about how to be productive, and then I'll talk a little bit about hybrid, especially for regulated industry. Let me cover a little bit of that very quickly. Um, so Uh, so when you look at hybrid scenarios, especially with data residency rules, especially for healthcare and fintech and insurtech, we have different tools in the entire data chain, whether it's a developer platform, whether it's DevOps, whether it's any kind of data platform for store, process, and query data, or it is any kind of identity solutions which you talked about in Azure directly, either in a B2C mode or internal, or any enforcing any kind of requirements, especially for authentication or access control. Azure directly provides that. And finally, when it comes to security, I think there are different kinds of tools. We talked about Defender. We talked about encryption at rest. So all of these are available across not just the cloud, but also in a hybrid scenario where you can maybe run like an Azure Stack or Azure Data Box, and push this all of this decision making in a semi-connected or a disconnected or a sporadically connected network, right? So you can choose to use the hybrid cloud in based on the customers you have. Especially, I think this is really useful in I said in regulated industry, or what is known as business to government or B2G segment as well, because there are strict requirements around data residency and where the data should reside, for legal and regulatory purposes. So you don't have to make these decisions early on. And again, we interface very well, as I said, with open ecosystems and open source. And again, like I know that Microsoft in the past has not been very friendly with open source, but that has changed with Satya Nadella coming in, and this is a quote from him from 2018. And I think we consistently delivered on that promise, whether we have when it comes to the acquisition of GitHub, or the kind of open sourcing we have done of our own internal products, whether it is like .NET Core, or whether it is Visual Studio Core, or whether it's TypeScript. There are lots of interesting and large projects which Microsoft has both supported and also helped contribute, like including like things like Kubernetes as well. So Azure supports the entire open source ecosystem, and specifically, I think this is kind of important for startups because there is some because I work with a lot of startups, I see that there is some amount of bias towards open source rather than proprietary tools. So when it comes to management in terms of Puppet, Chef, Ansible, or GitHub, when it comes to applications, whether it's Joomla, Drupal, WordPress, and you want to build basic websites or shopping sites, I think there is support for that. There's support for different kinds of databases and middleware. We already talked about MongoDB, Cloudera, and Hortonworks, which provide big data services, but also databases like Postgres and MySQL. And we talked about infra, whether it's Red Hat OpenShift, using Ubuntu in Canonical, using containers, using Docker. There's a partnership with Microsoft and Docker as well, for supporting it, or any kind of framework, right? Like agnostic in some sense of line, whether it's .NET, Node.js, Python, Java, PHP, Ruby. We have a support for many of these, whether it is serverless, whether it is running apps, whether it is running a different kind of frameworks, optimizing them, tuning them. There is a lot of support that we do for the open source ecosystem. And finally, before I think I'm coming towards the end of my presentation because we're almost at time. We'll talk about why it is kind of trusted. So this is just a snapshot of what are the Azure regions worldwide. I at last count I saw that there were more than 60 regions worldwide. We are present on pretty much every continent except I think Antarctica. And each of these regions you should be able to access most of the services that are there. If a region is new, maybe certain services might not be available, but most of the services will be available whenever region comes up. You can also show, I'm also showing you this map because you can do worldwide deployments. You can use this to plan your disaster recovery setups as well, or you can choose this to do in some kind of global load balancing as well. And this kind of map tells you that what is the extent of in terms of Azure regions, right? And there are again, as you can see on the map, there are announced regions and announced availability zones that are also coming in different regions. So this is like a work in progress. We continually are adding regions and hardware and even scaling the regions that are already there. I talked about security, and we have a security operations center or a cyber defense operations center where we have lots of professionals looking at lots of systems. And in fact, you would see that Microsoft, because we are supporting a lot of enterprises and we are supporting a lot of governments as well, like as you've seen in the Ukraine war, we're supporting the Ukraine government as well. We do cyber defense for not just like enterprises but also some countries now. And so all of this is done where we gather different kinds of threat intelligence and respond in real time. And then we have 50 plus products, which I won't go into this right now, that are there in the security operation. But all of these, the reason I'm talking about this is all of this is done to secure our customers, our infra. And when you look at the number of attacks that are happening, I think Microsoft is a number two, attack target across the world, and the first one is obviously the U.S. government. So that is a level of um, um, uh, infra and people and processes and effort that is dedicated to this to keep Azure and all of the applications running on Azure secure. So what I'll do now is also I'll talk about one of the, I mean, this is not specifically Azure, but I quickly want to talk about it, the Power Platform. And I thought the best way to kind of talk about is to actually talk about a customer use case, how we can empower developers and how you can empower your developers or your customers by, kind of extending your platform. And this is a good use case from a restaurant in Japan where this lady actually comes from a non-tech background, but still able to build applications to service her her restaurant. So I'll quickly play the video, and I think we're coming towards the end of the presentation. We'll take questions.
名前が秋吉忍です。100年続く老舗の食堂エビ屋で働いております。近くのパソコン教室にパソコンを持って、そしてその授業の間に自分のマシンラーニングの本を読みながら、あ、これはこうやってやればいいんだなと言ったら一生懸命打ち込んでいた時もありました。
1年前にパソコンを買ってデータベースを構築して、でお客様のインサイトを得ていくというようなことを自ら進んでやった
エビアでは時間帯によってや季節によって来るお客様の層が変わるので、それを実際に可視化して何人のお客さんが来るのかというのを把握したかったので、マシンラーニングを導入しました。私はまず本を買って Azure のマシンラーニングを勉強しました。そしてその後は実際に AI のシステムの構築であったり BI の使い方を学んで、実際に手を動かして勉強しました。マシンラーニングモデルを使って私たちは来客予測というのに成功したので、日頃のフードロスはかなり少なくなりました。そして中間品の準備ができるので回転率もかなり速くなって、お客様からのクレームは格段に減ってます。今エビラボには飲食業界の方だったりサービス業の方、そしてちょっと大きな企業の方からもたくさんのお声掛けをいただいております。私たちはそういった悩みを解決するためにエビラボのシステムをお渡ししております。テクノロジーのキャリアを築いていこうと思ったことは今まで一度もありませんでした。そういった方々、飲食業界で働く方々をもっと幸せな働き方にしたい、もっとハッピーにしたいというところに一番のやりがいを感じています。
Cool. And I'll leave you with the last slide, which is the resources. So you can go to Microsoft Learn, and we have specifically different kinds of reference architectures that combine these different services that are there in ways to achieve like different kinds of business outcomes and different kinds of scalability. So there are like, for example, analytics use cases, web. Um, how do you run microservices? What are the different modes in which you can deploy? So there is, as I said, like, there's a lot of choice. And how do you combine the different services? I think the reference architecture will give you good guidance in terms of architecture. What are the vetted architectures and what to use in what scenario? There are also plural site courses that you can use to kind of upskill yourself in addition to Microsoft Learn. And finally, there is the list of services that I had talked about are all listed for you to explore for your different use cases in the link below. So I'm pretty much done with the presentation, and we can take any questions that as they come in. Rashmita, are there any questions that you want to take?
I don't think we have any questions, Vinayak, but we can just give another 2 minutes if somebody has any question, or else we can uh, end uh, the session here. So while we are waiting, please do send your questions, or always you can reach out to Vinayak. Probably Vinayak can share his social handle link in the chat. So if you
I will
have
do
any,
that. Yeah.
yeah, so uh, if you want to come back with any question, please feel free to reach out to him, and he will probably, answer to all your queries. Thank you, Vinayak, so much. And thank you all for joining us today. Please do share your feedback about today's session. The link is already there. I think somebody raised hand. Shivdev? Yeah, please go ahead if you have any question.
Yeah, thank you. So I have a question for Vinayak. Vinayak, on the container services that you showed, there's a container registry, right? So can you briefly touch upon some of the container scanners we can attach to it to check for vulnerabilities, etc.?
Um, so, so when it comes to containers and be able to scan, there is a service. I think GitHub has that like in advanced service where you can actually scan the source code. I'm not sure like on the container service, but you can actually scan the source code for any kind of security vulnerability that GitHub Advanced Security has. Let me just pull out a, webinar that we did on it recently. Just give me a sec.
Okay.
So I don't know if we can scan container images, but definitely we can scan the source code and kind of find vulnerability. Let me just pull that webinar for you. Just yeah, I just found it. I'm just copying the link and let me just post it in the chat. Just a second, I'm just posting the link. So we covered, Azure here mostly, but we also, if you're part of MFS, you should be able to, get access to other services like OpenAI and GitHub as well. So GitHub actually, works really well when it comes to, securing your software lifecycle, right? So not just like I'm not talking just about containers, but also your source code, any kind of leaks that you have, any kind of not leaks, but any kind of secrets that might go into the code, or you will also scan and tell you like using Dependabot, like if you have any kind of frameworks that are that have vulnerabilities. So you will look at the entire stack. So I think this GitHub has actually a slightly more comprehensive solution when it comes to securing your source code, because that I think that is the direction in which you asked the question. Yeah.
Okay, sure. Thanks, Vinayak.
Yeah, so I just posted the link, securing your software lifecycle GitHub. You can just go through it.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Any other questions? So I'm available on Twitter as Vinayak H. So you can follow me on Twitter or DM me on Twitter if you have any questions, or you can also mail me at viheg@microsoft.com. So I'll post that email address as well. So if yeah. Wait for a minute or two if there are any questions, or we'll probably stop here because we're almost at time. Thanks, Shivdeep. I'm happy the session was useful for you.
Any more questions?
We wait for another minute, or we can stop, Rashmita.
Yep.
Cool. I think, Rashmita, we can stop here because I think we've answered most of the questions either on chat or here. And yeah, we'll see you all at the next session where we kind of go deeper into each of these services as well. So yeah, looking forward to seeing you all as we dive deeper into each of these services and helping you build your applications on Azure. Thank you so much.
Thank you all once again and enjoy the rest of your day.